What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at my top 10 favourite horror movies from the 1980s. Number 10, Friday the 13th, Part 2. The sequel to a somewhat landmark film in the slasher genre with Friday the 13th. Part 2 for me just amps everything up and makes everything just better, in my opinion. I think the cast of characters are more likeable and are really good. Jason is terrifying in the sack kind of mask, sack bag mask, whatever you want to call it. He's absolutely just frightening in this movie. And I think we get the best final girl in this franchise of Ginny. I think she's fantastic. The best final girl we've ever had in this franchise. When it comes to the Friday the 13th franchise, this is the movie I usually pick out to watch because I think it's just an all-round perfect slasher movie. It's one of the best slasher films from the 80s, and it's in my top 10 of the best horror movie from the 1980s. Yeah, Friday the 13th Part 2 is awesome. Number 9, Night of the Creeps. Night of the Creeps came out in 1986, and I've recently discovered this movie fairly recently in 2022, and it's instantly jumped on to my favourites of 1980s horrors. It's campy, it's funny, it's crazy good fun. Tom Atkins is on the top of his game in this as well. I love the concept. Yeah, this is a great horror movie from the 1980s. A great creature feature. Just, it has loads of things that makes 80s horror just wonderful. The practical effects are amazing. The acting is campy but just great at the same time. And I love this whole high school kind of sorority beta house thing it's got going on with it. And it's got that kind of high school kind of love interest in there, but it just turns horrific. Night of the Creeps is number 9, and I absolutely fucking love this movie. It's awesome. Number 8, An American Werewolf in London. I always forget this film came out in the 80s because it kind of feels like a 70s movie in parts. It really does. But this came out in 1981, the year of the werewolf, it seems, because a lot more werewolf movies come out that year. This is the werewolf movie, in my opinion. I think it's absolutely spectacular. I think it's the scariest werewolf we've ever seen on screen. It's gnarly as hell. You would not want that chasing you in an open field. It will fuck you up. Yeah, and it's got the greatest transformation scene in a werewolf movie probably ever. It's great. It seems painful. It wouldn't really be a pleasant transformation, would it? But yeah, I love the characters. David is just a cool character. I love his mate kind of pops up and he's slowly kind of decomposing, and he's worse for wear every time he pops up to basically say to David, you're going to become a werewolf, you need to commit suicide or something. But yeah, American Werewolf in London, the werewolf movie, and it is one of the best horror films from the 1980s. Hell yes it is. Beware of the moon, stick to the road, and keep away from the moors, or whatever the fucking quote was. Number 7, David Cronenberg's The Fly. Yes, more kind of creature feature body horror thingy bob. David Cronenberg's a masterpiece. Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, the tragic, horrific romance movie that turns into horrific body horror. I absolutely adore this film. It is wonderfully acted by both lead actors, as I said. Fantastic. It might be Jeff Goldblum's best movie, in my opinion. Best performance. He is so good in this movie. I just love this film. I love the concept of teleportation. I think it's fascinating. But when you take that idea and turn it into this horrible, tragic story, it goes mental in what it tries to do. It is gross, it is tragic, but in all honesty, it is one of the best films of the 80s, not just in the horror genre. It's just generally one of the best films from the 80s, in my opinion. The Fly is fantastic. If you've not seen this movie, it is a must watch. The Fly. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Number 6, Fright Nights. Fright Night happens to be my favourite vampire film ever. So just my favourite vampire movie ever. It's probably the coolest vampire movie ever. Jerry Dandridge is probably the coolest vampire ever to grace our screens. I love the story of this movie about this horror fanatic that watches this show called Fright Night with Peter Vincent, the famous vampire killer, and Charlie happens to discover that there's a vampire living next door and doing horrible things to pretty women and basically killing people, and he tries to warn loads of people, no one believe him, and he is tasked to try and get people to believe him and take out this vampire. I adore this movie. It is one of the best horror films of the 80s, hence it's on this list, and it's just the best vampire film ever in my opinion. I love this film. Fright Night is fantastic. Number 5, Return of the Living Dead. I can feel myself rot. I can't express how much I adore this film. It's my favourite zombie film, so take that how you will. Entertainingly, just wonderful movie. It's brilliant. It is so fun. It's so hammed up to 11. I love the whole brains concept, the new spin on the zombie mythos. It's just really fucking cool. Cast of characters are eccentric and lovable and kind of just out there. It's a wonderful movie. Send more paramedics. Send more cops. These zombies, they're smart, they want brains, and they will get it any way they want to. I think the practical effects are quite amazing for the time. The Tar Man is something to behold in this movie, and the way he kind of walks as if like his muscles and that don't work and he's just kind of like using gravity to like move himself, it is unsettling, and it is pretty kind of just a wonderful, you know, performance acting in a way. And yeah, this film is just next level in terms of just acting, comedy, horror. That's Return of the Living Dead. Number 4, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Dream Warriors! This is, for me, this is the definitive Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I adore this film. I think it is the best sequel in the franchise, and but in my opinion, it's the best movie in the franchise. It does everything what you want for a sequel to obviously a classic in the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. They bring in, you know, Nancy from the first movie, and she teaches these kids that they can be whatever they want to be in their dreams, and they have the power to fight back and hopefully defeat Freddy Krueger once and for all. This movie is so good. It's got an amazing cast of characters. They're all memorable in their own way. And obviously bringing back Nancy after the first movie is just a brilliant move all in all in terms of the writing here. It's got some of the coolest kills in the whole franchise. And of course we have the perfect balance in my opinion between scary as hell Freddy Krueger and the kind of goofy Freddy Krueger that we would get, you know, later on in the franchise. This is the film that gives us the perfect balance of his character. And I think that's where Robert Englund really found the character, is with this movie, and I absolutely love it. Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors is just fucking awesome. Number 3, Evil Dead 2. This film is an absolute masterpiece of what it is and what it does. It's a pseudo remake of the original Evil Dead, technically, and it is one of the greatest horror sequels ever made. Bruce Campbell puts on probably his best performance he's ever put on in this movie. His physical acting is amazing in this. It makes me laugh. It makes me just smile with glee how much he just gets into the role so much. And we get the iconic chainsaw hand and the words groovy. It's so good, and it should be in everyone's collection when it concerns 80s horror. Evil Dead 2 is a fucking masterpiece and one of the best sequels ever made. Number 2, John Carpenter's The Thing.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation, how would you know I'm really me?
I just can rewatch this movie over and over again and I'll never get bored. Everything about this movie is meticulously great. Everything, the music, the kind of simple
Bum bum.
The best parts of this movie to me are the quieter moments where it's like, you know, people are not trusting each other and the trust breaking down. You kind of sense that the paranoia is absolutely at its highest peak. Those moments where it's just eye contact between characters and you can see the distrust in their eyes, And yeah, it's just moments like that. And obviously, I can't talk about this movie without saying it's probably got the greatest practical effects ever put to film in the 1980s. I don't think there's any other film from the 1980s that has practical effects as good as The Thing. They've held up. You know, it's almost like it's 40 years old at this point, and it still is a marvel of practical effects. Kurt Russell as MacReady. That's my Kurt Russell. Beard, MacReady, awesome. I love this film. It is fucking brilliant, and it will be a constant movie in my life until I am no longer here, because this is one of the most rewatchable movies, not just in horror, but just ever. It's just so good. That's The Thing. My number one horror film from the 1980s, Critters. Of course it's Critters. One of my favourite movies ever. I adore this film with every fibre of my being. It's probably the film I have rewatched the most in my life. I absolutely love this movie. It is such a great creature feature. It's such a great sci-fi movie. The sci-fi elements are really kind of ignored in this film. It is actually a really great kind of science fiction film. I love the Krites. I think they're one of the greatest movie monsters ever made. They're literally little furballs with a mouthful of teeth, and they want to eat your face. It is so good. I love this film. I can watch it over and over again and not get bored. And it is literally the embodiment of what I love about the 80s. You know, Power of the Night, that is pretty much my anthem of 80s cheese. I love this film. It's so good. If you've not seen Critters, I really do implore you to go and check it out. It is just a feel-good, just great creature feature horror film that I think many people could get a lot of enjoyment from. It's not just my favourite horror film of the 1980s, it's one of my favourite films of all time. That's Critters. So that is it, guys. That is it. My top 10 horror films from the 1980s as it stands. Let me know what your top 10 horror films from the 1980s is. Let me know in the comments down below. Have you seen any of these? What do you think? How do you feel about Critters? I'm probably sound like a broken record with this movie, but I absolutely adore it. As always, guys, I have been Jason, and we'll be back with another top 10, but this time for horror of the 1990s. Look forward to that video. As always, guys, I will see you next time.